Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to talk about open source adoption, and open source is open choice, right? So I will give you a set of tools to help ease your decision about open source adoption, when you should do it, and give you practical tips how to choose the right open source project for you. But first of all, hi, my name is Hila. I'm a senior DevOps engineer, and I work for Wix, which is a company to provide platform for building websites, either for tech-savvy people or not. I have 15 years of experience in the tech industry. Recently, I have joined the AWS Community Builders program. I help co-organize conferences in Israel, where I live, DevOps Days Tel Aviv, and StatsCraft Monitoring Conference. I'm a mentor in courses and communities. Also, I'm a co-manager of a community in Facebook for open source, and I help lead programs in a community, a very large community for technical women in tech. I'm a DevOps culture fan. I think this is what helps companies achieve great things. And I'm a lead singer in a cover band, as you can see in this picture. It is a lot of fun. OK, so open source adoption, right? It's publicly available and can be modified at will. But of course, disclaimer, don't push to main. Open PRs, right? We don't want to create mess. And the thing is that a lot of tools that we have in our day-to-day is open source. So Firefox, React, Java, Linux, right? A lot of tools that we already use in our day-to-day is open source, which is awesome to know. So in the late 90s, open source was considered not quite the standard because proprietary software was considered the standard. And even using open source was considered to be like a bad strategy for companies. And coming forward from 2020 onwards, then open source really became a mainstream. A lot of companies both adopted, released projects to open source, and so forth. So what's so good about open source? First of all, it helps reach developer community, which is based on knowledge, but really relies on communication and collaboration to succeed. Without it, it would be very hard to achieve anything because we need to work together. Manish Sharma, who is the general manager of GitHub India, he said that open source is an enabler of innovation, and companies that turn to open source either adopt it or release projects to open source and basically affect the tech landscape, then it helps them speed up business transformation. So open source boosts code quality and security because, as Linus Torvalds said, the creator of Linux and Git, he said that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So if a lot of people review code, then they are able to spot errors and omissions. And if you don't only spot them, but also correct them, then the code will be in a much higher quality state and much more secured. Adaptivity. So the more use cases we have, the more robust the code will be. It is very, how do I say that? Because I have the notes with me. But since we have a lot of use cases, then the code will be much more robust, and a lot of people can adopt it and adapt to their use cases because we can open PRs, we can say, hey, this is good, but we need this tweak in order to really fit our use cases. And open source allows us that, exactly that, to be able to adapt to our use cases and needs. And agility, usually open source follows modern processes, which leads to much more frequent releases, which is good because when we look for proprietary software, then they usually have like a cycle of releases every Sunday because they don't want to rock the boat too much or affect their customers. But open source, you just release the versions, and that's basically it, right? And everyone can adopt and take the version whenever they want. So let's talk about the DevOps perspective, because usually, at least on my experience, open source is something that is more dealt with or considered from the developer's angle and not quite from the DevOps. So I want to share with you what I think about open source and other DevOps engineers that I spoke to again. And just to refer to Chris's talk, DevOps engineers are not really, it's not a job, but we can define culture. So I do consider it as a job because we need to automate and collaborate with others. So let's see. So let's discuss first the developer's perspective. So developers say, hey, we need functionality, and we need to understand how will the library that I just found online will get integrated in my code, and what efforts are needed to do so. Maybe I need to do refactoring or stuff like that. And as opposed to that, us DevOps, we say we care about the environment. We care about stability and scalability, so we need to understand how the project that we just found will fit in our environment as a whole, and other peripheral considerations like security, maintenance, and a lot of other things. And also, when it comes to challenges, collaboration leads to better conclusions and solutions, because open source is all about collaboration, same as DevOps, and about community. And when community form around shared challenges, then it allows really the best conclusions and solutions to arise, which is good, because I always strive to have the best solution, because I want to make sure that the environment is in the best possible shape. And also, we treat open source as tools, because we want to make sure that I have something that will help me deliver code, or automate this, or introduce this capability. And a lot of DevOps engineers came from the background of system administrators or system engineers like me. So the concept of integrations is not strange to us. So we just consider it as another tool to add to our tool chain, and we just do it, and that's that. But of course, not everything is good, right? We need to think about a lot of things, and some of the things are trade-offs between upgrades. I want to introduce new capabilities and new things, but we don't want to rock the boat too much. We want to make sure the environment is stable and secure. So there is complexity, of course. Show me really one person that is able to upgrade Jenkins without any fear of the plugins or Jenkins being a break. Just the other day, I had a developer that upgraded the version, and then he said, no, it's just a version, and we can roll back. Even the rollback didn't work. So we need to make sure that we know exactly what's going on, and we don't rock the boat too much, because we care about the environment stability and, of course, production and dev enablement. And when we search for open source tools, we always have in the middle research, because I want to read reviews. I want to compare it with other tools to make sure that I know exactly what I'm introducing to the environment. And I will speak about it a little bit more later on. Another thing is that this is generally true for DevOps as a culture, but also for open source. We need to keep tabs and be informed of what's going on. And I will give 2 examples to emphasize that. So let's say I found an open source tool that is version 1.0 is not really fit my use case. Maybe there is a very big bug that I can't really afford introducing to my environment. So maybe if I keep tabs and checking the next version that will get released, then maybe that version will be awesome, because bug was fixed, the features are now exactly what I need, and then it will be helpful. Another example is CentOS. It reached end of life at the end of 2021. And for those of you who don't know, end of life means that there are no more security patches being released to this operating system. And it means that if I didn't know about it, I'm putting my systems at risk, right? Because we all need security patches to make sure the environments are secured. Just the other day, OpenSSL with the vulnerability. So if I didn't know about it, I'm putting my systems at risk, which is not good. And I really like this picture, because if you'll see, it says, keep moving people, even though no one is there. That's the thing. We need to be informed and very proactive on what we do and keep tabs, because without having our team leader breathe down our necks, right, and ask us to do it, I think this will help us be better engineers in general. OK, so let's discuss now when should we consider open source, because sometimes it's not really the best fit for you. We just spoke about Kubernetes, very big buzz, but if it's not useful for you, then just don't do it, right? So let's consider at least some of the major reasons why to adopt open source, or when to adopt open source. So first of all, uncommon use case, and I will share an example. In one of my previous companies, we had a use case of application running on Kubernetes, and the application didn't need to run all the time. It could run only on certain conditions. And at that time, we used Google Cloud. And GKE didn't support downscaling pods to 0, only to 1. And then it's not great. So we searched for a solution online, and we found Keda. Keda is an awesome open source tool, production ready, and it allows you to downscale pods to 0, which is awesome because it was suitable for our use case, and it was great. So if you have an uncommon use case, you can just search online for open source tool that covers this use case, and that's basically it. Of course, the next reason is limited budget. So if you don't have the budget to support an enterprise solution, you can go with its free version or choose an open source version, right? And especially, there's a thing called lower total cost of ownership. So we will invest the same amount of time and efforts in training and maintenance in a proprietary software, right, in integration as well. So if we use open source, then we take out the cost outside because usually open source is free. Of course, you need to check the licensing. But if we invest the amount of time in training and maintenance and integration, both in open source and proprietary software, so might as well just go to open source if there is no really a significant reason that's preventing you from doing so. Another reason is when you have insufficient in-house resources, ability-wise, like this family guy right here, or capacity-wise to create a solution of your own. Then basically, there's also the saying, right, don't reinvent the wheel, so just look for an open source tool that covers your use case and just adopt that. So we can't discuss the good without discussing the bad, because this is life. Everything has upsides and downsides. So of course, these are not all disadvantages, but these are the ones that I think that are worth mentioning or discussing. So first of all, security by obscurity. This notion doesn't apply on open source because proprietary software companies can say that since the source code is closed, then hackers can't really check for loopholes and stuff like that. So this notion doesn't apply on open source, which is something to consider. Open source is prone to abuse. I can't say it really happens a lot because I didn't experience it, but I have two somewhat recent examples to share. The colors NPM package, where the maintainer added a loop in the code and created a lot of issues for a lot of companies. And another example is the Faker.js, where, if I'm not mistaken, the maintainer had a bankruptcy, if I'm not mistaken, and then the next version that he released was nothing. He deleted the project entirely. So I wouldn't say that it happens a lot, and I wouldn't say that even you will suffer from it, because if you put the version hard-coded in requirements.txt for Python or packages.json lock, you wouldn't experience it. But I believe that if all companies would do that, then I wouldn't even hear about this kind of scale issues, all the way to Israel. So companies still don't lock versions, and we need to just make note of that it is prone to abuse because a lot of open source projects are not backed up by companies. They are maintained by people like me and you. So it could happen, and we need to take that into consideration. Compliance. So in its raw form, it doesn't provide any guarantee or warranty. So if there are companies that have compliance reasons and considerations, then also this needs to be very much checked in order to make sure that you follow these compliance requirements. It's not always free, right? You need to check the licenses exactly, especially if the reason why you select open source is budget reasons. So just check the licenses before you rush to it. And discontinued projects. So as I said, sometimes, or a lot of times, open source projects are backed up by companies, but sometimes they are maintained by people like me and you, and they could decide to drop it, and that's OK, because it's their prerogative. So if this happens, it means basically two things for you. Either you need to migrate to another solution, or you will be the one to start maintaining this project. So this is something to consider. Support is not guaranteed, and you should assume good faith when it comes to open source support. But the open source project that I mentioned before, Keda, I had, just before we were about to be live in production, I had some very important issue to fix. I opened a PR, not a PR, opened an issue about it. I really explained the situation. I said, please, we are about to be production. Can you please help? And they just helped and released a version out of their work time, and it was awesome. So I assume good faith. I hope that you guys too. Not guys, everyone, not only guys. And yeah, it's a technique. And another thing is that proprietary software they have support, they have official support, but it doesn't guarantee that the support will be good. So that's also something to consider. And last but not least, SaaS alternatives, it's not really the opposite of open source, but since a lot of companies shift more and more resources to the cloud, then we will probably see more SaaS-managed alternatives getting adopted rather than open source. OK, so to sum things up in regards to open source adoption, there is really no right or wrong when it comes to that. It's a matter of perspective. And there are multiple factors to consider to choose but you need to choose what's best for your needs. And speaking of your needs, how do we choose the right open source project for you? Because sometimes, let's say you Googled a use case, you found 2, 3, 4 options online. How do you choose the right one for you? So there are multiple questions in different categories that we can ask ourselves in order to understand and choose the right open source for us. So the categories that I'm going to cover are popularity, activity, security, readiness, documentation, ecosystem, ease of use, and roadmap. So let's cover each one. So first of all, popularity. You should check for GitHub stars. Disclaimer, it's not, you shouldn't check that only on its own, like a standalone thing, because companies that have, projects that have backed up by companies, they have marketing, right? And so maybe the GitHub stars came from ads and campaigns and not really from users that actually use that. So just make sure that you couple this decision or couple this criteria with others as well. You should check for the project if it's part of CNCF or incubator, because if so, then it means that there are the high standards that they put are qualified for that project as well, which is good because we all want a very matured project to use. You should Google the project alone to check for online presence, but you should also Google it versus similar products to check for reviews, because we want to make sure maybe documentation didn't cover X, but on the review comparison, we will see that one is more suitable for our use case as opposed to the other one. Activity. So let's check the commit rate. Are the commits rate daily, weekly, monthly? How many issues are there? How many releases are there? Is the project maintained by one developer or more? Is the project has sponsors, companies that believe in the future of the project and wants to see it succeed? So all of these questions are meant for you to understand that if, for example, you have a heavy use case, how long you should wait for a bug fix or a feature to come out, which is very important, especially on a heavy use case and when you need to maintain things daily. Security. So you should really check for, you should check for known vulnerabilities and supply chain considerations. In my experience, it's less something on DevOps, because usually DevOps uses open source tools, projects that stand on its own and not really elaborate that we integrate to a code. But security should always be on the table, right, and discussed. So if there are security considerations to cover in regards to the project that you are discussing or the project that you're considering, then you should check that as well. Readiness. So is the project declared as production ready? Like KEDA that I mentioned, it is declared as production ready, which is awesome for me as a production gatekeeper. Are the current features enough to sustain usage? And also, is my use case covered fully in the current state? And if not, am I OK with it? Because if not, maybe I need to keep tabs, and maybe the next version will be much more suitable for my use case. So that's that. Documentation. So I believe that documentation is like the gateway for the project because you don't know anything about this project, right? And you need to understand how to integrate and known issues and explanations about the features, right? So if the documentation is very clear and concise and thorough, then it will help you understand if it's suitable for your use case, how can you integrate, and if there are known issues that you need to consider, especially if you have a roadmap of your own that you consider to do things in a certain way. So documentation is the way to go, and I personally didn't choose certain projects because the documentation was very unclear, both on usage and integration. So it's something to think about. Ecosystem. So I think this is the most important metric out there because this is the metric that will help you in your day-to-day, and I will explain. So in one of my previous companies, I used Rundeck as the CI tool, and back at the time, the documentation wasn't great. And the ecosystem was very small. Not a lot of people used Rundeck. So whenever I had to introduce new capabilities or enhance certain capabilities or features, then it was very hard to know what to do, right? And I didn't even have people to reach out to and ask for help, or how did you do this and that? So it was hard. As opposed to that, on other company, I used Jenkins as the CI tool. And you can say a lot of things about Jenkins, but the ecosystem is very, very big. So, and also the documentation is pretty great. So if you need to do things in Jenkins, if the documentation doesn't cover it, then a lot of people can help you. They also, there are dedicated channels for Jenkins in a lot of Slack workspaces that I saw. So community really for the win. People like to help. People like to share their experience and their use cases. So if the project that you have a dedicated community channel or people that are engaged in GitHub, then it will be awesome for your day-to-day usage, because then you wouldn't be frustrated of how to do X. You will just know. And another thing about ecosystem is it's not only the fact that you can reach out to people if you need it. It's the fact that if you know the ecosystem is very big, then it means that a lot of use cases are probably covered in this usage of this project, which is good, which means that probably wouldn't be that special, and you will know exactly what can be done and if your use case is covered or not, because, statistics. The larger the ecosystem is, the larger are the possibilities that your use case is covered. Ease of use, so do a POC, see how well the project gets integrated in your environment. Also check the ratio between the amount of time to implement until integration is finally done. It's important, usually, or mostly not because of the integration itself, because we usually do integration only once, but on the day-to-day basis. So if the tool is hard to use in the day-to-day, then again, it will be hard on your day-to-day maintenance to do things. And also check the issues on GitHub. Are the issues about features or about how do I do X? Because if the issues are about how do I do X, probably the project is not that easy to use. And last but not least, roadmap. So is the project defined as an open source? Or maybe it is planned to go towards monetization, which means the project will convert from open source to closed source. So it's also something to think about. And features planning. If the project itself has a roadmap, like we think about inserting this, or version, they already say that version, the 2, 3 next versions, future versions will include X, then you know the project is very well thought of and maintained. And it's awesome for us also to plan things, because maybe we'll see, content is not suitable, but next version will. So that's good. So I covered a lot of things, a lot of questions that you should check. So in order to sum things up, how to choose an open source project, you should ask the general questions to cover the basics. But you should also cover the basics, I mean, if the project is in a ready enough state, of course. And ask the tailored specific questions to cover your use case and your pain points, because this is what matters. Don't use whatever is popular. Use what's really needed for your use case. Otherwise, you will feel it in your day-to-day that there is a mismatch, and it will be very hard to maintain, but not only maintain, but also provide the user experience that is needed, right? Whether it's for dev enablement or anything else. And also, in regards to covering your use case and pain points, you should think about your specific scenario and then put the weight and the emphasis on the relevant metrics. So for example, if you have a heavy use case, then you should focus on and put the weights on documentation and ecosystem metrics. But as opposed to that, if you don't have capacity for maintenance, then you should really focus on readiness and ease of use metrics. Do a POC, see how well it gets integrated in your environment, and rely on your research, right? Ecosystem to the rescue, engage in GitHub, raise issues. It will help to the project success and eventually your success. And I spoke quickly. I'm sorry. I always speak quickly. I'm sorry about that. So I hope that everything was clear. Almost the last section of my presentation is because I really am an advocate of an open source. I want to share with you how to contribute to open source without writing a single line of code, either because we don't have the time to do it or we don't have the ability. Not all of us are developers. So the first thing is open issues, open bug fixes or feature requests. It will help making the project much more robust, which is good. It will cover more use case. The project will grow, so that's awesome. Modify documentation, as I showed you, it is a metric, and documentation is a skill. So if you have the skill, please leverage it. It will help people both considering to adopt this project, but also using it on a day-to-day basis. So it really is helpful. Share your use case. I've written a blog post about Script Server, which is an open source tool to make Terraform code and Ansible and other scripts exposed via UI with permissions. It was exactly what I needed in the dev environment in the company that I worked for. So I've written about it because maybe other people will see it and then say, hey, it's exactly what I need, and adopt it as well. And also, it's good to boost. Of course, I put credit to whoever the main maintainer. I put credit and let's support him. Share tools that you found with colleagues and techie friends, because if we know about things that could be helpful to others, we can share, and then maybe they can use it. Sponsorship. So as I said, some open source projects are backed up by companies, but some don't. And sponsorship is very important for projects to keep being alive and keep being maintained. So if either you can pitch in or you can convince your company to sponsor projects that you maybe use at work, then it will be awesome for these projects. Hold an open source mindset. So let's say I have a use case. If I don't immediately go to search for a proprietary software option, but I will search for an open source solution, then others can be inspired by that, and maybe they will start looking for open source alternatives as well. And last but not least, spread the word on open source at conferences like I'm doing just now. And since I have time, since I am an open source advocate, I want to share with you something that I have in my open source community. This is an initiative called Open Source Rel, like DevRel, but for open source. And it's basically a repository that consists of articles of me interviewing companies to help get their perception on open source and how they actively contribute to this realm. So let's say the company that I work for, Wix, other than releasing projects to open source, we actually have entire week in every quarter, okay, not a year, a quarter that they allow people to just sit and contribute to open source while they're on work. So this is awesome. So why did we choose to do it? Because, of course, it's good for them, for the PR, but not only that. We hope that by doing so, other companies will inspire other companies to basically contribute more to open source and be more active in this realm. And also for ourselves, individuals, we want to make sure that maybe if I search for a new job and I see that companies are contributing to open source, we share the same values, and I really like open source. So, hey, maybe I should go and work for this company as well. That's it. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much. And if you have questions, I think Ricard can come and share.
Yeah. Hold on, because that was a bit abrupt, so I didn't expect it to finish so quickly.
Yeah, I know. I'm speaking quickly.
There are a good
sorry.
number of them, so let's see. Yeah, sorry, my phone is like, OK. Yeah, there's one, a very interesting one. So there are many tools that, the open source offering offers limited functionality, and then you want that feature that is only paid, right? So what's your approach for that? The clear example could be Elasticsearch or something like that, What's your approach when you need one of these features? If you just need one, you try to write it yourself, you try to buy the whole thing, or like, what could you advise on this?
So it really depends on the use case. So if the use case is very, very heavy and like...
Sorry, guys, can you please not talk while we're doing the Q&A?
So if the use case is heavy, then probably I would need like maybe even a good support if it's pure production or not. So I will check the use case first. If the use case is very, very heavy, then maybe I would buy this specific one just for the feature. But if it's not that heavy, I would select an open source alternative.
OK. So yeah, one of the main issues when using open source is the lack of contribution by sometimes big names that use that. What are your thoughts on what can we do so that big companies kind of sponsor that, or is there any hope so that big names using open source contribute back to those projects, or we should just leave as it is? Or
so you mean when people?
Yeah, for instance, say Nginx or Apache, that everybody uses that, but I don't know if AWS has contributed to Nginx, maybe not, right? So.
Okay, understood. I think it should be their interest because you want to make sure that you have the reputation of being not only a taker but also a giver. Yeah. So there is a limit of things you could do as an open source. It's just there, right? You can say it's there but don't use it, right? Yeah. So you need to just hope that they'll understand that this is a community, this is open source, it's a give and take. And if you don't understand that, then maybe us as the crowd that's seeing it from the side will derive the necessary conclusions about that.
There's one that I'm not sure if you can answer. We did not sign an NDA, but they're talking specifically about your company, Wix. Mm-hmm. If you can more or less share some open source tools that you're using there, and also they're asking if you actually contribute to those open source projects, either by submitting pull requests or even financially. Mm-hmm. If you can disclose that, because sometimes. Yeah,
it is publicly available also in the article that the open source rel. You can read it all about there, if I don't cover here everything. So Wix released more than 200 projects to open source. On the guild days that I just mentioned, where we just sit for an entire week and contribute to open source, we contribute to the most used projects in Wix, the open source tools that we use. And one of those, I think, if I'm not, it was, I forgot the word, just a sec. Let's use conceived, but it's not good. The project that was conceived in Wix called Greyhound, since we used it a lot and we saw that a lot of other companies and other users can use it, then we released it as an open source tool, and I think that a lot of people are using it. I don't know other departments in Wix what they use, but me personally, I use Terraform, the open source version. We use Jenkins for machine learning models because I'm in the data engineering group in Wix. What else? I forgot. I'm blacked out. But we have certain tools, and we're always striving to add more because we're very we have this initiative to just, if developers can benefit from something, just add it.
And I think we're going to cover the last one. There's this say that if you are not paying for a product, you are the product. What are your thoughts if you think this applies a little bit to the open source, or it's not exactly the same? Or in some products, it could be a way to beta test them in a way?
I think that open source, it's the same as, proprietary software, just without the goal of making money. The goal is different. There are a lot of takes to it. But it's the thing about we are a community. We feel these pain points, right? We feel like we need this, we need that. There is no free solution. Let's create one, right? So I wouldn't say we are the product, but we are, since all of us are using tools in our day-to-day, we are all the customers of something, right? So we say that, let's help us. So it's not really us and them, we are all us. We are all in the same side. So.
All right, and I think we have time if there's any questions from the audience that we did not cover. Someone wants to raise their hand, otherwise. Ah, yeah, there's someone, yeah, sorry. Sorry if I miss some, because like I come here and then you keep posting questions and then I see them back, so try to put them 1 minute before they end because it's complicated otherwise.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, part of using open source is also kind of keeping costs low wherever possible, or maybe not having capacities, but when you start getting into licensing issues, it becomes very difficult to manage without shelling out a lot of money for some enterprise solution to manage licensing. So I just wanted to know if you had any guidance or ideas on how to better manage licensing from a company perspective.
I have less experience with that, but I can connect you with someone that does a consulting for that specifically because it's a very big topic. So I specifically have less experience in this area, but if you want to, we can speak later and I will get the answers that you need.
Super, thanks.
No problem.
No? No one else? Okay, so thanks for answering all this. Thank you, Hila, and we hope you have
Thank you, guys.
a pleasant stay. And good luck tomorrow in your talk in Germany. So this lady is flying tonight to another event, so we are super grateful she made it here all the way from Tel Aviv. So best of luck tomorrow as well.
Thank you so much.
Right, thank you.